people believe in God because that's what we're taught to believe, and obviously that's not always the case. Again, my dad told me he was God. I know there are former Muslims in the room. They obviously don't believe what they were taught. But my question is, if we're taught to believe something, why should we be suspicious automatically that it's false? For instance, I'm taught my ABCs, I'm taught the Pythagorean theorem, I'm taught what foods to eat and not to eat, and generally lots of what we're told, even though we're told these things, happen to be true. So why should we automatically be suspicious of certain things?
Because there are certain things, because there are different types of things. The ABCs are useful for writing and speaking. There would be some things I could confirm for myself. So my mom told me that China existed. I would believe her. And of course, if my teacher told me the same thing, I would probably believe her too. If I actually went to visit China, then I could verify it for myself. These kind of beliefs, it depends on how you learn them, what kind of beliefs they are, how you test them. And I could do the math myself. Someone teaches me that 2 + 2 is 4. I can do the math. All I can do, anything I can verify for myself, I don't care where the mom is.
So it's a question of, yes, we're taught it, but we can go out and test it and see that it's true and find strong evidence for it.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, would you apply the same thing to moral values? We're taught, don't murder, don't steal, don't rape. Things like that, would you say we have to be suspicious of those because those are more like the God hypothesis and not like the ABCs or the Pythagorean theorem?
No, those are human universal morals. And they seem to be tested out. I think more and more people want to affirm democracy. I'm saying about religions because there are so many of them and they have adherents who are so passionate about them. And it's obvious that religious diversity is spread over the globe. Now, and it's also obvious there's not a lot of evidence that can convince one another. Now, you say there are some people who get convinced of one or the other, and that is true. But it seems like to me that if you say of the Muslim faith, I'm going to examine the Quran as if it's a human document in order to test it to see whether or not it's true or not, then I fault you for a double standard for not doing that with the Bible by assuming...
Again, John, I do come to Christianity from an atheistic background. You're acting like I've never been through this. But I want to get back to what I asked you because I don't think you addressed it. If we're given a moral command by our parents tell us, don't go bash so-and-so's head in, don't do it. And if we follow your reasoning, we'd have to say, it seems, well, is that true? I've been taught that, but what independent, solid confirmation can I have? And it seems the only thing you've offered is that it's widespread around humanity. Well, belief in the supernatural world, belief in the soul, belief in God is widespread among humanity. So to be more specific, if, let's say, Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed and ate 17 people, was standing here and he says, John, I was taught once that I shouldn't eat people, and I came to reject that. Now, can you give me a good reason, because we demand hard evidence, remember, can you give me hard evidence for why I should not cannibalize people?
I can give you good evidence. Of course, I can't rely on the Bible, because in Jeremiah, God is so upset with some people for sacrificing their children that he decides to make them eat their children. But I don't have that problem, because I don't believe the Bible. I don't have to worry about those sorts of things.
Could you answer the question?
No, I was just getting to it. Okay. It seemed like to me that those kind of things are not exactly the empirical type of evidence claims, right, but they sure are experiential. And I think that I've got a daughter, and I don't want her raped, I don't want her killed, and I think that it's good for others to have that same kind of assurances. And so we're going to put children off limits. Don't touch my children. Otherwise you go to jail. And you don't do that to my child. I won't do it to your child. And likewise, and on and on.
So morality is just a social construct. I'm agreeing not to bash your head in if you agree not to bash my head in. But the actual moral value, it's morally wrong to hurt someone would have no place in your world. view. That would be a moral standard.
Oh, no. I think it's morally wrong to hurt somebody. You're asking me for the basis.
I'm asking you for hard evidence because you say you have to give hard evidence for things that you're taught to believe. We're taught to believe those. What's the hard evidence for these moral values?
Well,
all you said is, well, you teach them to them because it can be good. You could say the exact same thing about belief in an afterlife or belief in God. You would reject that argument there. So why are you applying the same reasoning here that you would reject when it comes to theism?
David, there must be hard evidence for that sort of stuff because we don't see murder and mayhem in the streets of Norfolk or Chesapeake.
There must be hard evidence.
We
for
see
it.
a little of
Then
it.
give us the hard evidence. John, again, what's the hard evidence? You're saying lots of people believe in the same things. Again, lots of people believe in God. Most people throughout history have believed in some sort of immaterial soul. You would reject it. You would say, look, I don't care if everyone held the same view. As long as there's not hard evidence for it, then we shouldn't believe it. So
there's hard evidence that when someone hurts somebody, that they feel pain. I mean, that goes without saying. And it seems like to me that if you use violence on someone, then violence will return on your head. If you steal from someone, if you're an accountant of some kind of big corporation and you start stealing from the bank, you will get caught. You know, those sorts of things happen all the time. So it's just better overall.
So John, look,
live a good life.
Look at what you just said. If you do something wrong, you might get caught. Therefore, you should believe in these moral values. Suppose we make it a law that if anyone rejects belief in God, we're going to kill him. Then you'd have to say, well, we should all believe in God not because it would have nothing to do with what's true. It's because there are consequences.
How do you answer something that's so ridiculous, folks?
It's not ridiculous, John. You said we should hold to these moral values because if we don't, we might get caught. Well, all you're saying there is you should believe in the moral values because if you don't, there could be some bad consequence. If we invent some sort of bad consequence for not believing in God, would you therefore say, belief in God is suddenly true?
David, you've read my book. I cannot believe you're bringing this up when you've read it. Listen, we choose an overall life plan. If I decide to be selfish through and to disregard people over and over again, I will not have holistic happiness. I must deny myself certain immediate sensual gratifications for long-term plans. Long-term plans of life override immediate gratification. So while it might be the case that by stealing from someone, I might get immediate gratification, you cannot turn character on and off like a faucet. Once you start down that path, you will probably end up in jail. You'll be ostracized, and your life would be a mess. It seems like to me you set yourself a course of character, and you just simply can't turn it off and on like a faucet. So you must deny yourself those immediate gratifications and be kind to people, even though it's not in your best interest at that moment for those long-term goals.
So all you're saying now is if it's in your since it's in your own best interest, you should do it.
Well, you only do what's in your best interest too. You just deny it. You're going to heaven, aren't you?
Sure.
Okay. What if God said if you kill this person, then I will send you to heaven? Would you do it?
I wouldn't believe
I'm asking you.
No, John, I'm saying
you're prudential yourself.
John, if I heard a voice telling me to go kill X, that would contradict what I believe. So I'd have to have some reason for believing.
Well,
that
then why
voice.
didn't Abraham have that same conscience?
Now, John, look at how you're avoiding the issue. What I do is I say, here are the principles John Loftus is using in his argument against the existence of God. Now, what happens when I apply those principles elsewhere, when I apply his exact same argument to morality? If I use the exact same reason...
We all have a common morality. Worldwide. We have C.S. Lewis and the Abolition of Man documents it. We have a common morality.
John, again, there's an overwhelming common belief in the human soul. There are people who don't believe in the soul, but there are also people who believe it's okay to eat people. So what I'm saying is, John, if you apply your reasoning...
That's okay in Jeremiah.
No, No, it's not. God's saying, I'm not going to, if I stop protecting you, bad things are going to happen. But John, I mean, think about this. You keep going, but it's a very simple, basic question.
All right, I'll answer it. Give it. You have 10 seconds. Give it to me.
All right, I'll postpone that.
Oh.
1 second.
Did I really stonewall through that one? Was that cool or what?
All right, John's questioning now.
Me. All right, David, here we go. Oops. If the Bible did not exist, would you still believe what you do? If the Bible was never written, would you still believe everything you do?
No.
Really?
If I tell
Interesting. Interesting.
Could you make a point?
Well, like for instance, that God revealed.
I mean, if you didn't exist, I wouldn't believe everything that I do right now. I wouldn't believe that John
All right,
Loftus
then.
exists.
Okay, then. All right. Okay. That was good. You get a point for that. Right. But no, I mean, everything you do about religion, everything you do about Christianity, everything you do about your, God. Well, I mean, there'd be a lot of things you wouldn't believe. I mean, admit it. A lot of things. I mean, if you want me to start naming them, I'd waste my time. I don't want to do that.
I think you're getting back to, I think, are you trying to get around to the idea that since we're debating the existence of God and I am a Christian, therefore our debate is on Christianity? Because suppose our debate was just on near-death experiences. Do people have near-death experiences? And you could step up to the podium and say, well, David believes in Christianity, and that's his ultimate goal. He wants to show that there is some support for Christianity. Therefore, I'm going to spend my entire opening statement attacking Christianity, and who cares about the near-death experiences issue?
That would be wrong.
Okay, then it was wrong for you to attack Christianity.
No, it's not, because
belief in God.
that's why we're here in the first place. I mean, I could see a debate between two people on whether or not people live again. I would like to live again. In fact, I want to believe. People don't believe this about me. I do want to believe in Christianity. I do want to be a believer. I did enjoy it.
No, you don't, John. Who do you think you're fooling? I want to believe in atheism, but the evidence is just so overwhelmingly against it.
Well, that's true. That's true. The evidence is overwhelming against it. All right, now let's talk about your double standards, all right?
Wow, did you hear that? Okay, go ahead.
The evidence is against...
Not what you said, John. I'm holding you to it.
All right, I got so many questions here. Let me ask you this. Why...
Fire away.
Why did God, in his foreknowledge, simply say, thou shalt not own or beat slaves, nor kill witches or heretics? And let me preface this. You said something that if God had said, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not rape, they will still do it. There's a difference, a huge difference. Because yes, they do kill and they do rape, but we're talking about a systematic slaughter by an institution. Now here's the difference. In an institution, one that carries on the name of God, you have to have the top dogs agree, you have to have the middle dogs agree, you have to have the lower dogs agree, and you have to have the willing compliance of the pews and the state of which you're a part that says, yes, we ought to kill heretics, yes, we ought to burn witches, yes, we ought to enslave people, and on and on. That is a different thing entirely. They could justify those things from the Bible in the Middle Ages and in the early modern era, and that makes a big difference. So why didn't God say, thou shalt not own or beat slaves, nor kill witches or heretics?
John, if you keep on reading to the final Christian revelation, we're not allowed to kill anyone or torture anyone. We are to be kind to everyone. No. If your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. These are very clear. Jesus says it's not just that you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. You are to love your enemies too. So you're asking, why didn't God command this according to Christianity? He did, but I see a much greater problem here. You find these things absolutely appalling, things like slavery or victimization of people or killing witches. And once again, you're refuting yourself. You even said the only reason you do anything is because someone won't do it back to you, and yet you're saying here are absolute moral standards that God should not have allowed to be violated. But here you're appealing to an absolute moral standard.
David, apparently you didn't get the memo.
Mm-hmm.
It says religion evolves. It says morality evolves.
Okay, well, it's just something that evolves. So suppose a species evolves and that species kills everything around it. Would that be right? Would it be right since it evolved?
Well, you know, if they
There's not a connection between it evolved and it is morally right.
if they have to eat, yes. But then I didn't create it. I mean, you know, it would seem like to me that if God exists, then the whole natural problem of evil, of the animal suffering that is prior to Homo sapiens.
But John,
Cannot
why is that
explain.
wrong? I still don't understand on your view why eating animals is wrong. It's you have to be presupposing that there is this absolute moral standard that would not allow such that it's always wrong to allow suffering.
All right, okay, it's my turn. I'm going to take this. David. Is Richard Swinburne one of your heroes?
No.
Fine. I'm going to quote from him anyway. What do you do with that? Richard Swinburne commented on the moral argument for the existence of God. He says, I cannot see any force in an argument to the existence of God from the existence of morality. In his book, The Existence of God, 1979, it's been revised, page 179. Now listen, if you cannot convince a Christian philosopher of that caliber of the moral argument for the existence of God, how do you ever expect to convince us? See, there's a difference between an ultimate standard for morality and simple moral basic, commands, moral.
Well, no, John, because what you're saying is, here's what I believe. I've been raised to believe that these certain things are wrong, and yet I claim that I reject things that I'm taught unless I have some really good reason for maintaining them. Therefore, if you're maintaining moral values so adamantly, you must have a really good reason for maintaining these things are wrong. If you have a really good reason for maintaining that these things are wrong, you can't just say it evolved that way. That's not a really good reason. So you must have some access to some kind of absolute moral law that makes you so adamant that these things should never be allowed. What is that absolute standard if you just say evolution?
Well, I'll tell you this right now, it's not the Bible. I mean,
What is it? Don't tell me what it isn't. Tell me what it is.
No, and yours isn't either. See, you don't want to go around committing genocide. You don't want to put.
I'm not allowed according to the Bible, John.
Just a second. I have 3 minutes, David.
Yes, to ask questions.
Yes. Would you please answer them as short as possible?
Which one?
My questions.
By the way, you're free to cut me off. You're free to cut me off. I cut you off.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead.
You're cut off. I do like him. Just because he's wrong, it doesn't matter. But it's not going to be from the Bible. I mean, I will not follow what the Bible says, and you don't either. You have evolved your morality just like every other person has. We all have our morality evolves, and so does our religions. All right, let me ask you this then. Why didn't God, who wished to remain hidden, why didn't he avert the Indonesian tsunami of 2004 or the earthquake that ripped through Haiti with the perpetual miracle?
Well, there's a number of ways that Christians can answer this question. I would say at the end of the day, Christians have never claimed to understand all of God's reasons. But I mean, just think about a basic Christian answer, not appealing to philosophy or theodicy or anything like that. According to Christianity, we are really bad sinners. I mean, think about it. When people argue from the argument from evil, they're talking about, look at the Holocaust, look at the rape of man king, look at all these horrible things people do. We kill each other, we torture each other. The Milgram experiment showed that if you tell people to torture someone, around 60% will not hesitate to torture someone else. So if that's the kind we are, I don't understand how you would say, on any philosophical or theological basis, God is morally obligated to give us a world where we never experience pain and we only experience pleasure no matter how much we rebel against him. I don't understand how you could possibly, is that what you're maintaining? No matter what we do, no matter how much we torture each other, no matter how much we kill, no matter how much we rebel against God, God should give us nothing but pleasure and should never allow us to go through any kind of suffering.
No.
Okay, good.
No, I mean, you have mischaracterized my view not only here, but in your talk. No, that's not what the atheist is asking for. Never experience any pain at all. If we have bodies, we have to experience some kind of pain, although God could have created us in heaven to begin with, where there's no pain or suffering and there's only bliss in the first place, having foreknown who would actually accept him as his Savior and therefore circumvented all of this earthly existence. I don't have time, it's 14 seconds.
All right.
Okay, let's hear it for these guys.
All right, well, again, I thought we were debating the existence of God, so I'm going to come back to the topic of the existence of God. Now, regarding the cosmological argument, I said that God created ex nihilo. John said, but there's nothing about this in Genesis. Well, if you examine the full context of the scripture, it's certainly ex nihilo, but regardless, I never appealed to Genesis. John is the one who's attacking Christianity here. I based it on the claims of physicists and cosmologists. Again, Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose. Almost everyone today believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. That's creation ex nihilo. John says, how can time begin? A timeless God can't create time, and that time came into existence. This is certainly an interesting explanation. I think it illustrates how we're reasoning differently. I reason as follows. If the universe came into existence and time came into existence, it's either caused or it's uncaused. I can't even conceive of how it could happen uncaused. Therefore, I maintain a cause. David, can you understand what it's like to be a timeless being and how it would be to create as a timeless being? No. I base my argument and my conclusion on what I know, not on what I can't understand. John says, I don't get how that could happen. Well, therefore I'm not going to believe it. Well, I don't get how all kinds of things could happen on naturalism. Even if you say creation ex nihilo of a world without a creator, I have no clue how that could happen. But if that's where the evidence pointed, that's what I would believe. But apart from that, I would say there's more than one type of causation than just temporal causation. Think about this. Why is this laptop here? Well, the laptop's here because I put it here a minute ago. That's temporal. I brought it over here and I put it here. You could also say the laptop's here because there's something underneath it that keeps it falling from the floor. That's not temporal. That's not temporal causation. This laptop is where it is because something in a different sense from a temporal cause is causing it to be where it is. So there are more than one type of causation, but again, John and I reason very differently. If the universe began to exist, caused or uncaused, I say cause, and it would have to be timeless. The cause would have to be timeless because time came into existence. The cause would have to be immaterial because matter came into existence. So I draw the conclusion that this is what's required. John says, but I don't get it, therefore it's not true. Well, again, I don't get all kinds of things that I would accept as true if there's evidence for them. The argument from fine-tuning, if he made a response to it, I still haven't caught it yet. The argument from biological complexity, he says the world doesn't look intelligently designed, again, because bad things happen. John, I gave you specific examples. Think of a specific example, like DNA. DNA looks intelligently designed. The information coding system looks very, very, very intelligently designed. If you look at the molecular machines, they're called molecular machines for a reason. They function like machines. They certainly look designed. Now what John means is, but I can look at other things that don't seem very well designed and seem to have a problem. Suppose there's a big nasty scratch or a gash across this laptop. But I therefore say, well, the laptop doesn't require any sort of designer. No. If it requires a designer, then even if there are some other things that look like it's been damaged or something, we would still say that the evidence of design points to a designer. The argument from consciousness, he says, science can come up with explanations, we just have to wait for them, and I'm ruling out explanations and cutting off science. John, if your view is that consciousness is simply a matter of brain states, and people who have no brain states, they're not having any brain activity, are conscious, there is no further inquiry that's going to solve that problem. Your view has been falsified. It's wrong. It can't possibly come up with an explanation. No brain activity and still conscious means that brain activity and consciousness are not the same thing. That's a fact. Now, John says he doesn't understand how God can be immaterial. Here again, we have a difference between our methodology that's accounting for a lot of the difference in the way we view these things. I say if consciousness and the brain cannot be the same thing, and if consciousness can survive the cessation of brain activity, therefore consciousness is some sort of immaterial thing. Do I understand how that works? No, I don't understand how that works. But if that's where the evidence points, whether I grasp something that's beyond my comprehension is irrelevant to the question of whether that's where the evidence points. So it seems that John is saying, well, look, even if every person, whoever dies and is brain dead for a while, has all kinds of experiences, well, since I don't understand how that could work, it doesn't matter what the medical evidence shows. Well, it does. And if the evidence shows that consciousness survives the cessation of brain activity, I have to believe that. The argument from reason. He said, well, here's how we account for the origin of things. Someone saw an apple, someone saw an orange, someone said that is not that. That's not the law of non-contradiction. That's not this thing is separate from this thing. It's a statement cannot be both true and false at the same time and in the same sense. And the point is, we regard these statements as true universally. In fact, across all possible universes, we regard these things as the laws of logic is absolutely certain. You'd never get that. You'd never get the absolute nature of a law of logic just by saying, well, this isn't that. Therefore, there are all these logical laws. But when we reason, we're presupposing all these logical laws. They are universal. They're not bound by time. They don't depend on human minds. Well, if they're concepts, and concepts exist in a mind, and these concepts are universal, and they transcend our world, you've got a mind that transcends our world. The argument from logic. John says, did God create logic, or is he bound by it? I'd say it's God's nature. It's God's nature. That's how, whatever God's thinking would be like, it's logical, and that's the source of logical laws. John can say he doesn't agree with it, but I have an explanation, and he has none. Now, when the reason I was focusing on morality is that when atheists present the argument from evil, they're presupposing that they're objective moral values, whether they admit it or not. If you say that suffering is evil, you're saying that there's a moral standard that allows us to distinguish, not between what we don't like and like, but what's good and what's evil. If you say that God can't allow suffering without a morally sufficient reason, you're saying that there is an absolute moral standard and that humans have access to this absolute moral standard thing. John is telling God what he can and can't do. You can't do that based on, well, this is how things evolve for us. That wouldn't apply to God. So if he's saying there are these moral values that apply to God, that's an absolute moral standard. So if objective moral values do not exist, atheists can't say it's immoral to allow suffering. But John says that it is immoral to allow suffering, which means that he's appealing to objective moral values and presupposing the existence of God. So in addition to the 6 things I've shown required for this debate, all of which point to the existence of God, we can now add a 7th, objective moral values, which presuppose a transcendent moral standard, a standard we call God. That's up.
Testing. It's just really hard to know how to respond. I already dealt with his arguments for the existence of God. I don't see why he jumps to the conclusion that the God of the gap that explains consciousness and reason and intelligent design couldn't be nothing more than a scientific God who is trying to figure out how to create a good universe. And this is just one attempt. Or is trying to just observe us like rats in the maze. Or it could be an evil demon who would, in that point, just play tricks on us. It's not a logical contradiction to have an evil God, because you can't say of God he's good or evil. All you can say is he is God. If he's a standard for goodness, then he just does what he does. If he's a standard for logic, he just does what he does, and he calls that logic. Wherever the buck stops, he's got problems. Professor John Shook suggests that it doesn't matter if what we believe corresponds to reality, provided what we believe is useful for survival. John Shook is a pragmatist. And so there's eternally problematic conceptions of trying to come up with the correspondence theory of truth. A lot of philosophers have abandoned it. And so, because realism cannot be defended. And so John Shook simply argues that, it's not what corresponds to reality. This is true if it corresponds to reality. It's whether it's useful for survival, which fits perfectly with evolution and does completely away with his argument from logic to God's existence. And it's patently false. You need an absolute standard for morality, because we can have morality without religion, because we have philosophical arguments for morality, like utilitarianism, virtue theory, John Rawls' social contract theory, and even Hobbes' hedonism. You can have others. We can have morality without religion. We can have morality without Christianity. Some other religions have a much higher standard of morality than Christianity does. Jainism won't even allow their adherents to eat plants. They say, is that a higher or lower standard? I don't know. It's certainly different, and the other religions have a morality, some of them greater than, or more strict than Christians. And we can have morality without humanity. There are a lot of studies in animal biology, that shows that animals care. Animals have to get along. There are some cheaters in the animal kingdom, and they have to be weeded out. I got to just tell you an example. My dog, Frankie, he's a basset hound. Those are the dogs that look really, really dumb. But I'm sorry, but I'm just astounded by his intelligence. And you say, well, no, intelligence demands a God. If Frankie had a God, his God would be a basset hound. Because we create God in our image. Well, anyway, my wife and I were breaking up some sticks after cutting down a tree, and we're putting it in a fire pit, and we had to break them up to get them into the fire pit. So here, Gwen and I are just breaking up sticks so that we can burn them in the fire pit. Now my dog comes along, and he decides he's going to help us. Usually he takes a stick and he chomps on it, runs away from it. But he sees what we're doing. We're breaking sticks, and we're putting them in the pile at a certain length so that we can burn them. So then we put in the pit itself. My dumb Frankie basset hound comes along, and he starts to break them, and then drop them, break them, and drop them, break them, and drop them. Where did that intelligence come from? Where did that care come from? Well, you know what? If animals have moral conscience, then of course maybe they too would go to hell. In fact, maybe they'll be in heaven. But then you have all kinds of problems. I think that any doctrine of the afterlife that doesn't include animals in it is deficient. So, but those require a lot of problems. Now, about the near-death experiences, there's oxygen deprivation. That's what happens when you have a brain that has little or no oxygen. And as far as the brain waves go themselves, some of you already noticed my stepfather died last week. I went out to Reno. It was a bittersweet moment because I was able to see him before he passed away, and then I was able to comfort my mom at the same time out there. But when I flew out on last Thursday, he didn't have any blood pressure and his legs were purple, and they didn't expect him to live until I got there on Friday. We have a lot in common. He thinks the Bible is a bunch of fairy tales, for instance, but he does go to a Presbyterian church and finds some comfort to worship at that church. We don't agree on everything, but he had no blood pressure. And what that means is that they couldn't detect any. That's what the nurse said. We can't detect any blood pressure because as soon as you put that thing around the leg or the arm to detect it, you cut off all blood circulation. So by all intents and purposes, he had no blood pressure, but blood was still running through his veins. That's the case with these brains. We can't detect the brain waves, you see. They're just oxygen deprived. They're not dead. If they're dead, they don't come back to life. I have never seen anyone come back to life.
and neither have you. These are concocted stories about things that never happened. That's my opinion. But then you can ask Michael Martin, who is writing a book on it. You can ask Victor Stenger, who is writing a book on it. And I'm going to wait further information from what they have to say, but it doesn't seem initially plausible to me. All right, I've got a minute 26. Have I answered all of his objections yet? I mean, is there one I missed? In the end, he's got too many double standards. You know, he's got the double standard here and a double standard there. He's got a double standard when it comes to how to evaluate gods. Oh, here it is. He holds to other God hypotheses to a much higher standard than his own. He accepts his so easily. You see, it must then point to this God. He accepts the results of science in every area but a few which his holy book claims. You know, he didn't talk about prayer. He values faith over reason, and it blinds him to the probabilities. He holds God to a lower standard than the CEO. You know, this God, here's my point. Here's why I'm an atheist, bottom line. I couldn't believe that anymore. I became an agnostic because of it, because as soon as I realized this religion fell, I realized that all other religions fell by the same standards where I applied the same reasoning and the same skepticism to them. And so then, the only thing left was just simply to say, if there's a God, he's too small to take notice of. If there's a God, he's not worthy of any respect. And I became an atheist. And I heard the bell. So it looks like I'm done. Thank you. Was that my final statement? I ain't got anything more to say.
In this debate, I've argued that without God, nothing makes sense. If God does not exist, we have no explanation for the existence of our world, or for the fine-tuning of the cosmos, or for biological complexity, or for human consciousness, or for the reliability of human reasoning faculties, or for the laws of logic, or for absolute moral values. And so if God does not exist, we can't even make sense of the fact that we are having this debate. I would say that all of John's responses failed. He hasn't given us any reason to doubt any of the arguments I presented. The only extra response I caught in his second rebuttal is that oxygen deprivation explains near-death experiences. He said we just can't detect the brain activity. We have all the instruments set up to detect brain activity. They read 0 brain activity. And well, maybe there's all this extra brain activity that we just can't detect. Well, John, if you're going to say that, you've accused us of rejecting what science shows. Science shows there's no brain activity, but you reject that because you don't like the conclusion. But John has offered several arguments in this debate. God might be evil. Now, I don't understand how an evil or limited or flawed God could be the absolute standard of morality or logic. But again, we saw that this sort of skepticism wouldn't lead to agnosticism just with regard to God's existence, but with everything. Following John's reasoning, again, I would have to remain an agnostic about his existence, because I could be dreaming, or I could be in the Matrix, or an alien could be tricking me. There are all kinds of possible explanations for why I'm seeing him. Therefore, according to him, I shouldn't believe that he exists. So in other words, even if we have all kinds of evidence pointing to God's existence, maybe there's some evil demon trying to trick us. Well, if you're going to reason like that, be consistent and apply it everywhere. He claimed that evil refutes the existence of God, but again, this put John in quite a dilemma, because he rejects arguments for theism, no matter how strong they are, and no matter what the evidence shows. If it shows that consciousness can survive death, well then, the evidence is just wrong. So he'll use any justification to reject an argument for theism, but if you're going to do that, be consistent and reject the argument from evil. Reject all of this evidence, because for all you know, there could be all these reasons out there. I could give some, but I don't need to, because look at what he's saying. Even if I have all my instruments hooked up to detect brain states, and there are none, maybe there are some there anyway. Well, great. If you can't think of any reasons why God will allow suffering, maybe they're there anyway. Why the inconsistency in his methodology? John says that we can have morality without religion. Absolutely. Because atheists have access to the same absolute moral values that we have. But when they defend naturalism, they're claiming that they don't believe in that absolute moral standard. And so they're claiming that they don't have a moral standard, and yet they constantly appeal to him every time they make moral judgments. John says we create God in our image. God is omnipotent, omniscient, infinite, holy, and good. I'm not. He says I hold other theistic views to a higher standard when I evaluate them. No, if Islam is right when it says that God is all-powerful, then Islam is right with that respect. Or could they be wrong on other things? Yes, that would have to be on a doctrine-by-doctrine basis. So, after 2 hours of debate, we have every reason to believe in the existence of God, and we have no reason to reject the existence of God. And I think that theists can therefore rest assured that our belief in God is not only rational, but essential for rational thinking. Thank you.
It's the same page I brought up last time with the same notes on it. I'm supposed to look for something I hadn't yet discussed. It just seems like to me the evidence simply is not there. He can posit any God of the gaps he wants to. But that's all he's doing. And anybody can posit a God of the gaps and say this God did it. I suggested several of them. They're unworthy of worship. They're not worth spending your time on. I could safely dispense with them. I don't care. I mean, they're either impotent or uncaring, and I can live my life without them. Science gets along just fine without the God hypothesis. I don't care how many. If you only knew how many times people would say, you know what, there is no other explanation but God, but then all of a sudden science figured it out. And how often theology has stopped science in its tracks. You would be appalled, and you would say, you know what, but we accept those results now, you see, because we're enlightened, we're different, you see, but then all of a sudden step right in and say all over again, but no, we can't explain this, we can't explain that. But we are explaining those sorts of things, and he argues from consciousness and reason all over again. There's really a problem to assert that there's a soul. There really is. What is there about the mind that the soul can make contact with? You know this. Unless there's some kind of point of contact between the two. Let's say the soul or the mind decides to tell the body to do something. Like raise your hand. Well, the soul or the mind is going to try to tell the body what to do. But it's a soul, remember? It's a mind, remember? That's what he's claiming anyway, right? However, I can already prove that I can affect the mind, if there is such a thing, with a crowbar to the head or a stroke, you see. But when, not that, Dr. Hayes, stop it. I didn't mean to make you laugh. But, I'm no crowbar here. But where is that point of contact? That's the problem with the mind and brain, and he knows it all too well. That's the problem that we're dealing with here. How can the mind tell the brain to move your arm, if there is one? And there really is no good solution to it. You should see the concocted views that Christian philosophers have come up to try to explain it. Occasionalism or idealism. Just concocted views to try to explain that sort of thing. If there is no point of contact, then they're like ships passing each other in the night. How can the soul tell the brain what to do? Well, it can't. That's basically why there must not be a soul at all. The brain does it all. And I think I can account for the rules of logic with that. And I think that any attempt to say that I have problems, that God does it, is really misguided. Every problem that I have in trying to understand consciousness or logic or morality, and I do have problems with that, this God does. So it's a simpler hypothesis to just do away with it. And the intelligent design, he comes back to it. There's just one thing you must understand. The odds of us being here tonight are just absolutely astronomical by 100 years ago, because your parents had to meet, the sperm had to meet the egg, and you had to be raised a certain way, and you had to, in fact, decide to come here tonight and to dress the way you did, and had to listen to my words, the very words I'm choosing to speak. All this thing is so astounding from even 100 years ago, and so rarity by itself in design does not mean it was designed. It's just rare. Looking back on hindsight, everything looks astronomical. That's because that's what looking back on things shows us. But it doesn't show us that it was designed, only that almost any event we look in the past is astronomical. It's almost like a truism. It does not point to God. Thank you so much.